The morning sun painted the desert rocks red as Apache gathered her water jugs. Her mother's coughing echoed from inside their small adobe home, each sound cutting through Apache like a knife. The illness had taken hold 3 months ago, turning her strong mother into a frail shadow who could barely sit up to drink water. Apache tied her long black hair back with a worn leather strip and lifted the heavy clay pots. The nearest water source was 2 miles away, down a rocky path that cut through thorny mesquite and prickly pear cactus. Her feet had grown tough from making this journey twice daily, but the weight of the water jug still made her shoulders ache by the time she returned home. Her mother had been the village's most skilled weaver, creating beautiful blankets that traders would travel days to buy. Now her hands shook too much to hold the wool, and her breathing came in short, painful gasps. The medicine man had tried his herbs and ceremonies, but nothing seemed to help. Other families in their small settlement had offered assistance, but Apache felt the burden was hers alone to carry. As she walked the familiar path, Apache remembered better times when her mother would tell stories while they worked together, preparing food or mending clothes. Her mother's voice had been strong then, filled with wisdom about their ancestors and the old ways. Now that voice was barely a whisper, and Apache feared each day might be her mother's last. The waterhole appeared ahead, a precious oasis surrounded by green grass and shaded by cottonwood trees. Apache had been coming here since childhood, but lately the journey felt longer and more difficult. She knelt by the clear water and began filling her jugs, watching the ripples spread across the surface. A roadrunner darted through the brush nearby, reminding her that life continued even when everything felt dark and hopeless. On her way back, Apache noticed fresh footprints in the sandy soil near the path. They were larger than hers, made by someone wearing traditional moccasins. She paused to examine them more closely, wondering who else might be traveling this remote route. The tracks seemed to follow the same direction she had taken, but she had seen no one at the waterhole. When Apache reached home, she helped her mother drink small sips of the cool water. Her mother's eyes, once bright and alert, now seemed distant and cloudy. Apache prepared a thin soup from dried corn and herbs, hoping to tempt her mother's appetite. The afternoon passed slowly, marked only by her mother's labored breathing and the occasional sound of wind through the roof beams. Evening brought cooler temperatures, and Apache stepped outside to escape the stuffiness of the sickroom. She looked toward the hills where the path wound its way to the water source, thinking about tomorrow's journey. In the fading light, she thought she saw a figure standing motionless among the rocks. But when she looked again, nothing was there that night. Apache lay on her sleeping mat listening to her mother's restless movements. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of endless paths and empty water jugs. She woke before dawn, already dreading another day of watching her mother grow weaker, while feeling powerless to help as she prepared for another water-gathering trip. Apache found herself wondering about those mysterious footprints. In a landscape where every person was known to their neighbors, the presence of a stranger raised questions. Her grandfather had told stories of wanderers who appeared in times of need, but Apache had always thought them mere legends meant to comfort children. The desert morning air felt crisp against her skin as she set out once again, carrying the same heavy jugs and following the same worn path. Her mother's condition showed no signs of improvement, and Apache knew she might be making this journey for many months to come. The thought filled her with a mixture of determination and despair, but she pushed forward because there was no other choice. 3 days after noticing the footprints, Apache saw him for the first time. She was returning from the waterhole, struggling with the weight of the filled jugs, when movement caught her eye. About 50 yards behind her, a tall figure walked steadily along the same path. He wore traditional buckskin clothing and moved with the silent grace of someone who knew the desert well. Apache stopped and turned around, expecting the stranger to approach or at least acknowledge her presence. Instead, he simply stopped walking and stood perfectly still, like a statue carved from the red rock around them. His face was weathered and angular, with long gray hair that hung loose around his shoulders. Most striking were his eyes, which seemed to look right through her to some distant point beyond. When Apache resumed walking, the man resumed walking too, When she stopped again to rest her aching arms, he stopped as well, maintaining the same distance between them. He made no attempt to speak or come closer, but neither did he turn away or take a different path. Apache felt a chill of unease mixed with curiosity. Who was this silent follower, and what did he want? She hurried the rest of the way home, glancing back frequently to see if the man was still there. Each time she looked, he continued his steady pace, never gaining ground but never falling behind either. When Apache finally reached her door, she turned for one last look and saw him standing motionless on a small rise about a quarter-mile away. Her mother was awake when Apache entered. Propped up against folded blankets and breathing with obvious difficulty, Apache told her about the strange man, describing his appearance and peculiar behavior. Her mother listened with more interest than she had shown in weeks, her cloudy eyes focusing intently on Apache's words after a long pause. Her mother spoke in her weak, raspy voice about the old stories passed down through generations. She mentioned wandering spirits who appeared to help families in crisis, beings who existed between the world of the living and the world of the ancestors. Apache had heard such tales before but never given them much thought. Now, with her mother's serious expression and the memory of those penetrating eyes, the story seemed less like fantasy and more like possibility. That evening, Apache couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She stepped outside several times, scanning the horizon for any sign of the mysterious figure. The desert appeared empty under the starlight, but she sensed a presence somewhere in the darkness beyond her vision. Sleep came reluctantly, interrupted by dreams of silent footsteps and unblinking eyes. The next morning brought no change in her mother's condition. If anything, she seemed weaker than before. Apache prepared for another water run with growing anxiety about encountering the stranger again. She considered taking a different route, but the alternative paths were much longer and more dangerous. Winding through areas where flash floods had carved treacherous ravines. As she approached the halfway point of her journey, Apache spotted the man again. This time he was closer, perhaps 30 yards behind her, walking with the same measured pace as before. His presence no longer surprised her, but it still made her nervous. She tried walking faster, but he adjusted his speed to maintain the same distance. She tried walking slower, and again he matched her pace exactly. At the waterhole, Apache filled her jugs quickly while keeping one eye on the surrounding area. The man had disappeared from view, but she could feel his presence like a weight pressing against her consciousness. The normally peaceful oasis felt charged with tension, as if the very air was holding its breath in anticipation of something significant. On the return trip, the man reappeared at his usual distance. Apache decided to test him by stopping abruptly and sitting down on a large boulder as if to rest. He stopped immediately and remained motionless until she stood up again. The pattern repeated itself several more times, confirming that he was indeed following her deliberately rather than simply traveling the same route by coincidence. When Apache reached home, her mother was sitting up with unusual alertness, as if she had been waiting anxiously for her daughter's return. Apache described the day's events, including her experiments with stopping and starting. Her mother nodded slowly and asked detailed questions about the man's appearance and behavior, seeming to compare Apache's description with some internal checklist. After a week of the silent following, Apache began to feel less afraid and more frustrated. The man's presence had become as predictable as sunrise, appearing behind her on every water-gathering trip, but never coming close enough for conversation. She started talking to him from a distance, calling out questions that he never answered and comments that he never acknowledged. Her mother's condition continued to worsen despite Apache's devoted care. The older woman now slept most of the day and ate very little, her breathing becoming more labored with each passing hour. Apache felt desperate and helpless, watching her mother fade away while a mysterious stranger observed from afar like some kind of silent judge. One particularly hot afternoon, Apache decided she had endured enough of the wordless game. After filling her water jugs, she set them down and marched directly toward where the man stood watching. He didn't move as she approached, his dark eyes remaining fixed on some point behind her. Apache stopped just a few feet away and spoke directly to him, demanding to know who he was and why he followed her. The man's weathered face showed no reaction to her words. Up close, Apache could see that his buckskin clothes were old but well maintained, decorated with intricate beadwork and patterns she didn't recognize. His hands were large and calloused, the hands of someone accustomed to hard work. Most unsettling were his eyes, which seemed to look through her rather than at her. As if she were transparent, Apache tried speaking in different dialects, thinking perhaps he came from a distant tribe with unfamiliar customs. She gestured with her hands, attempting to communicate through movement when words failed. The man remained perfectly still, breathing so quietly that Apache began to wonder if he was breathing at all. His lack of response made her feel foolish, and she finally returned to her water jugs with burning cheeks. That evening, Apache's mother called her to sit beside the bed. Speaking in barely audible whispers, the older woman shared more details about the ancient stories she had mentioned before. She described spirit guides who appeared during times of great need, beings who could not speak because they existed partially in the realm of the dead. These entities were said to possess knowledge about healing and death, but they could only help those who understood their true nature. Apache listened with growing amazement as her mother revealed family secrets that had been passed down through generations of women. She learned that her great-grandmother had been visited by a similar figure before discovering a hidden spring that saved their village during a terrible drought. Her great-great-grandmother had encountered a wordless woman who led her to medicinal plants that cured a plague affecting their horses. The story suggested that these mysterious visitors appeared only to women in her family line, always during crisis situations when conventional solutions had failed. They never spoke or explained their presence, but their arrival marked the beginning of unexpected help or guidance. Apache's mother believed the current visitor was connected to her illness, though she wasn't sure whether he came to help her recover or to guide her peacefully to the afterlife. Over the following days, Apache found herself studying the man more carefully during their strange daily encounters. She noticed that he never seemed to tire despite walking the same difficult path, never appeared to sweat despite the desert heat, and never carried any supplies or water containers. His footprints in the sand were clear and deep when she looked for them, but they seemed to disappear mysteriously after a few hours. Apache also began observing patterns in his behavior that she had missed before. He always appeared at exactly the same spot on her outward journey and disappeared at precisely the same location on her return. He never deviated from the main path, even when Apache took small detours to avoid particularly rocky sections. Most strangely, he seemed to anticipate her movements, stopping a split second before she stopped and turning in the direction she intended to turn. Her mother grew weaker each day, sometimes falling unconscious for hours at a time before awakening confused and disoriented. Apache felt the weight of impending loss pressing down on her like a physical burden. She had tried every remedy she knew, consulted with the village medicine man multiple times, and prayed to every spirit her mother had taught her to honor. Nothing seemed to make any difference. One morning, as Apache prepared for another water run, she found herself hoping the mysterious man would appear as usual. His silent presence had become oddly comforting, like having a guardian who asked nothing in return for his protection. She realized she had begun to depend on seeing him, using his appearance as a marker that the day was proceeding normally despite the chaos of her mother's illness. 2 weeks into the strange routine, something different happened. Apache was halfway to the waterhole when she realized the man was not following her. She stopped and looked back along the empty path, feeling unexpectedly anxious about his absence. The desert seemed too quiet without the knowledge of his silent presence behind her, and she found herself hurrying toward the water source with growing unease. At the oasis, Apache filled her jugs with trembling hands, constantly glancing around for any sign of the mysterious figure. The usual peace of the shaded grove felt ominous without her wordless companion somewhere in the distance. She had grown so accustomed to his presence that his absence felt like a bad omen, suggesting something terrible might be happening at home while she was away. Apache practically ran back along the rocky path, the heavy water jugs bouncing against her hips with each hurried step. Her feet slipped on loose stones, and thorns caught at her clothing, but she pushed forward with desperate urgency. The silence around her felt oppressive rather than peaceful, filled with unnamed threats that her imagination conjured from shadows and wind sounds when she burst through her door. Apache found her mother sitting up in bed with unusual alertness. The older woman's eyes were clearer than they had been in weeks, and she was breathing more easily than Apache had seen since the illness began. Her mother smiled weakly and asked why Apache looked so frightened, commenting that she felt better than she had in many days. Apache described the man's absence and her growing panic during the return journey. Her mother listened thoughtfully, then shared her belief that the mysterious visitor's disappearance meant something significant was about to happen. She spoke about sensing changes in the spiritual world around them, as if invisible forces were shifting and preparing for an important event. That afternoon, Apache's mother remained unusually alert and talkative. She shared memories from Apache's childhood, stories about her own parents and grandparents, and wisdom about facing life's challenges with courage and faith. They talked more intimately than they had since before the illness, with her mother speaking in a stronger voice than Apache had heard in months. As evening approached, Apache's mother asked to be helped outside so she could watch the sunset. They sat together on wooden chairs beside the door, sharing the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other completely. The desert landscape stretched endlessly before them, painted in brilliant oranges and purples by the dying light. Just as the sun disappeared behind distant mountains, Apache spotted a familiar figure standing on the rise where she had first seen him weeks before. The man was clearly visible in the twilight, his tall form silhouetted against the darkening sky. But something was different about him now. Instead of the motionless stance Apache had grown accustomed to, he was gesturing slowly with both hands, performing movements that seemed ritualistic and purposeful. Apache pointed toward the figure and whispered to her mother, who squinted in that direction and nodded slowly. The older woman seemed to recognize something in the man's gestures, murmuring words in an ancient dialect that Apache barely understood. She spoke about ceremonies performed to guide spirits between worlds, rituals that help souls transition peacefully from life to death. As they watched, the mysterious man's movements became more elaborate and graceful, like a dance performed for an audience of one. His arms moved in sweeping arcs, his body swayed in rhythm with some unheard music, and his long hair flowed around his shoulders like water. The performance continued for several minutes before he gradually became still again. Standing motionless as the last light faded from the western sky, Apache's mother smiled peacefully and asked to be helped back inside. She settled into her bed with obvious contentment, pulling her favorite blanket up to her chin and closing her eyes with an expression of deep satisfaction. Apache sat beside her, holding her mother's thin hand and listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, which seemed stronger and more regular than it had been in weeks. That night, Apache slept better than she had since her mother's illness began. She dreamed of clear water flowing endlessly from hidden springs, of desert flowers blooming in impossible abundance, and of her mother dancing with graceful figures whose faces she couldn't quite see. The dreams felt more like visions than random thoughts, filled with meaning that existed just beyond her conscious understanding. When morning came, Apache woke to find her mother still sleeping peacefully, her breathing deep and regular. The older woman's face looked more relaxed than it had in months, as if she had been relieved of some great burden during the night. Apache prepared for another water-gathering trip, wondering if the mysterious man would resume his following or if yesterday's absence marked the end of their strange relationship. Apache's mother passed away peacefully 3 days after the mysterious man's ritual dance. She died in her sleep with a serene expression, as if she had been expecting and welcoming her transition. Apache found her at dawn, lying still beneath her favorite blanket with her hands folded gently across her chest. The room felt different somehow, filled with a sense of completion rather than loss. The funeral preparations kept Apache busy for several days, following traditional customs that had been passed down through generations. Village women helped prepare her mother's body with special herbs and oils, while men constructed a burial platform on the hill overlooking their settlement. Apache wrapped her mother in blankets woven from wool dyed with sacred plants, creating a colorful cocoon for her final journey. During the mourning period, Apache found herself thinking often about the wordless stranger and wondering if she would ever see him again. His presence had become so much a part of her daily routine that his absence left an empty space in her consciousness. She walked to the waterhole each day out of habit, but the path felt lonely without his silent companionship somewhere behind her. 1 week after the burial, Apache was returning from her usual water gathering when she noticed fresh footprints in the sand near the path. They were the same size and shape as those she had seen weeks before, made by traditional moccasins and heading in the same direction she traveled. Her heart began beating faster as she followed the trail with her eyes. Searching the landscape ahead for any sign of movement, she found him standing beside a large boulder about halfway between the water source and her home. But this time, instead of maintaining his usual distance, he was positioned directly on the path she needed to take. Apache approached cautiously, unsure what this change in behavior might mean. As she drew closer, she could see that he was holding something in his hands. The man extended his arms toward Apache, revealing a beautiful water jar unlike anything she had ever seen. It was made from red clay decorated with intricate black designs that seemed to shimmer and move in the sunlight. The jar was smaller than her usual containers but appeared to be perfectly crafted. With smooth curves and a wide mouth that would make filling and pouring easy, Apache reached out hesitantly and took the offered jar, feeling surprised by its lightness despite its substantial appearance. The clay felt warm against her palms, as if it had been sitting in sunlight for hours, and the decorative patterns seemed to pulse with their own internal rhythm. She looked up to thank the man, but he had already begun walking away, moving with his characteristic silent stride toward the distant hills. That evening, Apache examined the mysterious water jar more carefully by lamplight. The black designs were painted in patterns she had never seen before, incorporating symbols that seemed familiar yet unidentifiable. Some resembled flowing water, others looked like mountain peaks or desert flowers, and a few appeared to be stylized human figures engaged in ceremonial activities. When she filled the jar at the water hole the next morning, Apache discovered its remarkable properties. Despite its small size, it held as much water as her largest clay pot, as if the interior space was somehow expanded beyond what the exterior dimensions should allow. More amazingly, the water inside stayed cool and fresh even during the hottest part of the day, never developing the stale taste that plagued her other containers. Apache began using the magical jar for all her water needs, finding that single trips to the oasis now provided enough water for several days. The reduced frequency of her journeys gave her more time to focus on other tasks, like tending her small garden and maintaining her mother's weaving materials. She felt as if a great burden had been lifted from her shoulders, replaced by a sense of possibility and renewal. As weeks passed, Apache noticed other changes in her life that seemed connected to the mysterious jar. Plants in her garden grew larger and more productive than ever before, even though she was using the same water source she had always used. Her own health improved dramatically, with increased energy and stamina that allowed her to accomplish more work in a single day than she had previously managed in. Several word spread through the village about Apache's remarkable water jar and its apparent magical properties. Other families began asking where she had obtained such a treasure, but Apache found it difficult to explain about her wordless benefactor without sounding delusional. She simply said it had been a gift from a traveling stranger, which was true enough without revealing the supernatural aspects of the encounter. The village medicine man visited Apache to examine the jar and hear her full story about the mysterious wanderer. After studying the painted designs and listening to her detailed account, he confirmed her suspicions about encountering a spirit guide. He explained that such beings appeared rarely, always during times of great transition, to provide assistance that would help their recipients move forward into new phases of life. Apache realized that her mother's death, while painful, had also freed her from the exhausting daily routine of constant caregiving, with the magical jar providing abundant water with minimal effort. She now had opportunities to pursue other interests and perhaps even leave their remote settlement to explore the wider world beyond the familiar desert landscape. 6 months after receiving the magical water jar, Apache made a decision that would have been impossible during her mother's illness. She chose to leave her childhood home and travel to the larger settlements, where her mother's beautiful blankets had once been sold, with the mystical jar ensuring she would never lack for water during her journeys. Apache felt confident about venturing into unfamiliar territory. Before departing, Apache visited her mother's grave one final time, carrying flowers and burning sacred herbs while sharing her plans with the spirit of the woman who had raised her. She spoke about her dreams of learning new weaving techniques, meeting other craftspeople, and perhaps finding a place where her own skills would be valued and appreciated. The desert wind seemed to carry her words away with approval. Apache packed her few possessions into leather bags, taking her mother's weaving tools, the precious water jar, and memories that would sustain her wherever her path might lead. As she walked away from the only home she had ever known, she felt both sadness for what she was leaving behind and excitement about the unknown. Adventures ahead. Her first destination was a trading post 3 days' walk to the north, where merchants from different tribes gathered to exchange goods and share news from across the vast desert region. Apache had never traveled so far alone, but the magical jar gave her confidence that she could survive whatever challenges the journey might present. On the second day of travel, Apache encountered a family whose own water supply had been contaminated by a flash flood. Their children were crying from thirst, and the parents looked desperate as they searched for any clean water source in the barren landscape. Apache used her magical jar to provide them with abundant fresh water, watching in amazement as the small container produced enough liquid to satisfy their entire group. The grateful family insisted on sharing their evening meal with Apache, and around their campfire she learned about opportunities in distant settlements where skilled weavers could earn good livings creating blankets and clothing for wealthy traders. They described workshops where women shared techniques and patterns, creating beautiful textiles that were prized. Throughout the region, Apache reached the trading post successfully and immediately attracted attention with the exceptional quality of water she carried in her distinctive jar. Merchants who sampled it declared it the sweetest and purest they had ever tasted, offering to purchase her entire supply at premium prices. Apache politely declined, explaining that the jar was not for sale, but she used the interest it generated to establish connections with potential customers for her weaving work. Over the following months, Apache traveled from settlement to settlement, building a reputation as both a skilled weaver and a woman blessed with an inexhaustible supply of perfect water. She learned new patterns and techniques from other craftspeople, incorporating their knowledge into her own evolving style. Her blankets began commanding high prices from traders, who appreciated their unique beauty and exceptional quality. Whenever Apache encountered families in need of water, she freely shared from her magical jar, never allowing it to run empty no matter how much she gave away. These acts of generosity earned her friends throughout the desert region, creating a network of allies who welcomed her wherever she traveled. Her reputation for kindness spread as quickly as her fame for beautiful weaving. Years passed, and Apache established herself as one of the most successful and respected craftspeople in the territory. She eventually settled in a prosperous trading town where she opened her own workshop and taught weaving to younger women who sought to learn her techniques. Her magical water jar became legendary throughout the region. Though few people understood its true supernatural origins, Apache never forgot the mysterious wanderer who had given her the precious gift that transformed her life. Sometimes, while walking alone in the desert, she thought she caught glimpses of a tall figure watching from distant rocks or ridges. She never tried to approach these sightings, understanding that their connection existed beyond ordinary human interaction. In her later years, Apache became a storyteller herself, sharing tales about the spirit guides who appeared to help people during their darkest moments. She taught her students that help often came in unexpected forms, and that maintaining faith during difficult times could lead to remarkable transformations. The magical water jar remained with her always. A tangible reminder of the mysterious forces that shaped human destiny, Apache lived a long and fulfilling life, using the gifts she had received to help others just as she had once been helped. When her own time came to leave the earthly world, she passed peacefully in her sleep, clutching the sacred water jar that had changed everything. The jar disappeared that same night, never to be seen again, waiting perhaps for another soul in desperate need of hope and transformation.